And today we turn our attention to internal factors, things we did right at home, okay? And the first internal factor that I sort of began talking about was the role of the state, right? And take the role of the state, we could conveniently put that as guided capitalism, okay? And this is used not only in Korea, but also in the case of Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And we could include today, which country? China, okay? Guided capitalism simply means the government playing a very prominent role in guiding its economic development. Okay, ideally speaking, or in the way the West uses, sort of conceptualizes capitalism, is how it should be market driven, okay, with minimal intervention from the government, okay? But in the case of Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and China, you have the government playing a very heavy-handed role in determining, the policies, and really, heavily involved in the workings of the economy. Okay, so guided capitalism promoted a close liaison between government and business, and under guided capitalism, the government selected export-oriented industries and corporations to be supported with cheap bank loans and other subsidies. So, in the next 2 slides or so, I'm going to tell you what guided capitalism in Korea entailed. Okay? And when I sort of jokingly said how, Avalanche should be made into a free park for all the children in Korea, and maybe for the world, it's because, its birth, not necessarily birth, but it's the way it got, so big and became a very influential multinational corporation, was possible because of the government input. Okay? So this is what guided capitalism was about in Korea. First, it protected fledgling domestic industries by implementing protectionist policies. So, the major conglomerates that you know of, they not only manufactured goods, but they also imported. And it is no exaggeration to say that they had monopolies in importing particular products. Okay, so if one company imported sugar, for example, it had a monopoly. Okay, let's say CJ, which the mother company of CJ is or was 제일제당, right? It had a monopoly in importing, like in today's economic climate. Can any company have a monopoly in importing a particular product? No, you could import anything, and you could compete. But back in the 1960s, one company had a monopoly in importing a product, and you wanted to import a competitive product, you were not allowed to do so. So that's the kind of a sort of free ride that some corporations were given. Protected selected corporations by restricting entry of other firms into the same industry, and that is called exclusive licensing, giving them practically a monopoly. So this is, again, also applying to importing. Okay? Mobilized tax breaks to support the selected industries, providing financial support that is cheap loans, okay? And with long maturity periods. 1.5. Led restructuring of industries and corporations in distress. 6. The government encouraged domestic savings so that the money can be made available for industries. So you know how our savings rate now is below 10%. But in the 1960s, 70s, and on to the 80s, Korea's savings rate was one of the highest in the world, at like over 30%. And the government acted to repress organized labor. I mean, this tradition still continues in a way, because many labor strikes are deemed illegal. I'm not sure how that really works. If you want to look into this, because practically every labor strike that I've seen happen in Korea was deemed illegal, and I never really understood, who makes that interpretation, and what this interpretation is based on. Okay, so I think this is an important factor in how the government manages the economy, because labor is an important part of the economy. We just don't think about this, right? Because we just think of economic growth, economic output, GDP, but laborers are an important part of the economy, and when there is this business versus labor, and when the labor is suppressed, then we could conveniently say that the government is siding with business rather than labor. And I think in today's capitalistic climate, is in a way natural, right? That the government sides with sort of the business side rather than the side of labor. Okay. But so what's different across, if you do the sort of the cross-cultural or cross-societal comparison, what you find is the difference in degree, not of kind. So I think practically every country, again, if it's faced with this business-labor opposition, the government is more likely to side with business than labor. Okay, and I think this is an important point to sort of discuss, because Park Chung-hee is the most respected president of Korea thus far, and because he is seen as someone, or the leader, who facilitated, who was responsible for the remarkable economic growth that our country has achieved. Now, and this is my own sort of assessment of his leadership, and I like to call it necessary leader. And I want you to think about this, not to agree with me, but to see whether this makes sense. Okay. One of the reasons why Park Chung-hee is sort of denounced by labor activists and progressive intellectuals is that he did suppress labor. Okay? And many labor activists were jailed. Some of them, ended up dying. Now, back in the 1960s and 70s, could we have had a leader who was soft-hearted and listened to all the demands, or granted the wishes of all the labor activists, and allow, or forced companies to pay them higher wages, then could Korea have achieved its economic growth? And think of this. In the 1960s and 70s, before Korea launched this heavy industrial sort of a plan, most of our exports were what? They were labor-intensive products, which were based on cheap labor. So if you think about the Chinese case, if you look at the early phase of Chinese industrialization, one of the key reasons why Chinese products dominate the markets in many parts of the world is that they are cheap. Okay? And that's what Korea's strategy was too, back in the 1960s and 70s. Our products were cheaper than their rival products from, let's say, Japan or elsewhere. So, unless we had this strong leader who artificially, suppressed wages, our products might have lost their price competitiveness. So we don't need a leader like him today because the time is no longer right. We can no longer, ask or force laborers to receive a low wage working under poor conditions. But at the time, in the 1960s and 70s, that's the kind of things that, again, we sort of needed. And it is something that, yes, it is, we're sorry, I'm sorry for the workers of the 60s and 70s who had to endure tough working conditions and long hours of work for low wages, but that's what it took for Korean products to sell, okay, outside of Korea. So that's why I'm saying he was ruthless, but for the time period during which we achieved very crucial advantage in the international market, we needed a leader like him. That's why necessary leader for that time period. And do you have any thoughts on that? That is my own interpretation. And don't ever think that I like this guy, because I have every reason to dislike him. And I won't say why. I'll tell you this, actually. My father was a mayor of Cheonan. It's a city about an hour drive from here. He was the first, when Lee Seung-man was in power, first president of Korea for like 12 years, we didn't have elections to elect mayors and governors. The president chose like his cronies, friends, to these posts. So when Jang Myeon came to power, we held our first ever election to elect local government representatives. So my father was the first elected mayor of Cheonan. But this is my sort of head-on clash with Park Chung-hee happened. So he staged a military coup, and one of the first things he did after taking office, after becoming president, was to dismiss all the elected sort of representatives. And he went back to the way Lee Seung-man used to rule. He personally chose all the mayors and governors. So my family was a victim of his regime. And yet, I'm, in a way, big enough to recognize that something he did right, I have to say, oh yeah, you did this right. Okay? So, if you were to really say something negative about this guy, I would say things like this. How he wanted to prolong his stay in power by amending the constitution, right? And how he suppressed press, right? That's very extensive censorship, okay? So we could come up with many things you could say that are negative about this guy, but at least with his economic development, I think, for the very crucial time that Korea was in the 1960s and 70s, he was the necessary leader. Okay, so now we turn to the second internal factor, and that's the contribution of South Korean workers. And it's simple. They were well educated and well trained. Now, you may ask yourself, and you should really have asked this question. Back in the 1960s, were Koreans really well educated? Believe it or not, for the 1960 period, we still had a large proportion of the population who went to elementary and junior high. It's one of the highest in the world, even back then. Okay? So our zeal for education was evident even back then. Okay? Hard working, that's for sure. They endured low pay and poor working conditions, and which facilitated Korea's cost competitiveness, and endured the longest average work week in the world, and that's still happening. Okay? So this was from when? 1960s. And today is 2015. And this is from like the 2010. Okay? The OECD average, this is annual work hours. Okay? OECD average is 1,718 hours. Korea is over 2,100 hours. More than 400 hours we work longer than the OECD average. But is our labor productivity as high as the OECD average? No. See, that's the crazy thing. Your parents, your brothers and sisters are working the longest hours, and yet, when it comes to labor productivity, it's about 2/3 of the USA. So what it means is that they spend a lot of time at work, but they're doing again, I hope when you start working, be able to work. I can't really say, you gotta really work hard and be on your own, because it's a group thing, right? You just can't do things on your own or individually, right? Okay, so look at workers in Netherlands. So we're talking about people who work from, let's say, 9 to 3, and never mind 9 to 5, okay? And I think if people are given freedom to really do what they need to do for the day, in the fastest time that is, allowed, and I think this is the kind of system that you come up with. Anyway, although it says role of culture and timing, it's still sort of internal factors, right? And you could call this a third internal factor, so nationalism. And the question is, can nationalism serve as an ideology to make workers work hard? Is that possible or not? In what ways? In the Korean context, how do you think this nationalism was sort of mobilized to make Korean workers work hard? Let me put it this way. We did, even in the 1960s and 70s, we did have labor strikes, but the numbers were small, okay? So what it means is that vast majority of Korean workers did not really sort of do anything that was destructive of the operations of their work. So you could easily say that the vast majority simply complied. They worked hard, endured low pay, and they worked under poor working conditions. So they took that in. And one argument is that that was possible because of their love for their country. Okay? So how did that work? So what do you think that the government and companies, what did they do right to mobilize Koreans to accept these very poor working conditions? Very poor working conditions mean not only low pay, but long hours. And when I say long hours, we're not talking about getting extra pay. We're talking about working from, let's say, 8 to 10 without an extra pay. Okay? But why do they endure all this? Now this is where nationalism comes in. Okay? But before I talk about what I have to say, do you have any ideas as to how nationalism contributed to economic growth in helping or making workers work hard for the country? Yes?
The fact that everyone can from themselves as a community as one, then if you have the nationalism values and the context also is not clear, then like it makes it more easy to use nationalism as a
Okay, I think the combination of Confucianism and nationalism definitely worked to make Koreans work hard. But that's correct. But I'm looking for specific reasons, more specific reasons. What, for example, are the specifics involved in the use of nationalism to make Koreans work hard and accept, accept the poor working conditions that they were subjected to? Yes.
I feel like given the abject state that Korea was in, assuming that each respective government in the past they devised, strategized, gigantic images of what Korea could be, releasing not only in schools but also around workplaces that the prospect of a Korean dream is possible and probably modeling after the United States. So, and in order to achieve this, the government has got, like you said, suppress organization, and they're probably very, emotive about speech during campaigns and so forth to help facilitate this Korean dream.
Okay, good. I think we could sort of rephrase this Korean dream in this way, and that is the government propagated or told or sent this message to Korean workers that Korea has suffered for centuries, and our nation has suffered for a long time, and again we were invaded, so many times, and the recent sort of setback was Japanese colonization of Korea, and then the most fresh memory of sort of suffering was the Korean War. So all of these happened because our country as a nation was weak. Okay? So how do we solve all these problems that, that sort of made Korea suffer so much? So the answer, the government argued, was economic growth. That only by achieving economic growth / industrialization can Korea become strong so that we can withstand, okay, potential setbacks that could be caused by, in the case of the 1960s, the threat from North Korea. Okay, so again, Koreans as a whole, okay, the whole population and also workers, of course, they all realized how we needed to industrialize fast so that we don't suffer another, sort of a national tragedy like the war. See, only by becoming strong we could thwart North Korea from attacking us again. Okay? So that was one clear message that workers accepted, right? That we needed to become economically strong so that our army gets strong and North Korea cannot, sort of think again about attacking us again, right? And the idea that, we could overcome all the social ills like poverty, hunger, through economic development. Do you think that idea won a lot of support or not in Korea? Of course, up to the 1960s and 70s, poverty and even hunger were rampant. Okay, you talk to your parents about their friends. Okay, not having lunch at lunchtime. Okay, even when I went to school in the 1960s and 70s, I think there were up to 1/5 of the students who came to school without lunch. Okay, so we're talking about the country that really, in which poverty and hunger were rampant. Okay, and on top of that, because our sovereignty or the country as a whole was weak, we were invaded numerous times, and the message was that we could overcome all these through economic growth and industrialization. Okay, and also to prevent North Korea from attacking us again. And another idea that really won a lot of support is that we needed to catch up with Japan. Okay? Because Japan, for a long time, we thought of, again, I think I told you this before, we always thought of Japan as a country that sort of somewhat inferior to us, because the most advanced civilization was China, and we were the direct sort of follower of this advanced civilization, and we then, whatever we received from China, we transmitted to Japan, and yet Japan was so far advanced economically, and sort of the government worked on this very sort of a sense of rivalry that we had with Japan. So the idea was that we needed to catch up with Japan, if not to move ahead of Japan economically. So this sense of nationalism very strong in the 1960s and 70s, and I think even to this day, when it comes to sort of consumer nationalism, I think we're probably almost like #1 in the world, right? We love our movies, even if they suck. Am I using too strong a word here? I think when it comes to buying things, we're very nationalistic, because I think we grow, even from early on, we sort of tend to internalize how buying things Korean is helpful for our economy, right? Yeah.
Is that the reason why there is no official Apple store in South Korea?
No official.
Apple store in Korea? If you look at the world, most developed cities, the OECD, they all have official Apple. So when we first came here,
I didn't know that there was no Apple store.
There are like
But there is a secondary in
the premium
It's
data.
a reseller.
I was wondering if that the reason like this idea of like nationalistically supporting LG and Samsung at these major rivals, is that the reason why there is that?
I think it begins sort of culturally. Because we don't like apples. I don't know if there's any government sort of policy involved in this.
I'm just curious, is that just a cultural thing or is it economically not really kind of efficient? And that means increase revenue.
Well, does anybody have an answer to this? Why is it that we don't have a single Apple store in Korea? Is it because of any kind of economic nationalism? But in today's world where WTO sort of has such an immense power, it's just not imaginable to think that somehow government is sort of preventing or blocking Apple from setting up a store in Korea. But if it's Apple's own decision, it's probably because the rent is so high. Yeah. Only. Yeah. I mean, yes. But do they sell only iPhone? No. Apple.
Yeah, we know that. It's like a racing, it's frisbee, it's unlimited.
No. I've seen like Apple stores, like in Canada and the United States, where they are really big and they only sell Apple products.
No one has a specific reason.
Mm.
But some reasons that they might have given is that Apple stores or Apple products are selling they don't really need to.
Mm.
One other thing is that there might be some compression on specific restrictions that they're not yet pressures from markets. And the fact that like Samsung originated from Turkey is just
Anyway, thanks for drawing my attention to that. How Apple Store is not in Korea. I didn't know that we hated Apple that much. Apples. All right. And next is Confucianism. And I think Confucianism, or its role in economic development of Korea, could be an unintended contributing factor, meaning whether we like it or not, we are all Confucianists. Okay? We practice Confucianism every day. When we speak Korean, when we bow to our elders, okay? And that makes, Koreans sort of ready for this top-down, sort of a rigid command system of, factories and also work world, okay? So, and at the same time, companies also stressed how we needed to sort of cooperate and maintain a harmonious relationship with managers and owners to work hard. Okay, so the loyalty was emphasized, and in the West, when people start working, the chances of them sort of moving on to different job is very high. Yes or no? Is it safe to say that Westerners are constantly looking to, move to a different company for better, pay and all that? Whereas in Korea, I think it's more workers now, sort of quit and then get jobs at different companies than ever before. But I think the key sort of cultural sort of a mindset is that of loyalty. That once you get a job, then you sort of stick with it, right? Again, it's much less true today, but at least, at the time of Korea's rapid industrialization in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, loyalty was stressed by the company, and at the same time, Korean workers internalized that. Okay, they didn't really look around to look for a job that paid better. Okay, so this emphasis on self-discipline, diligence, and hard work. Okay, and this emphasis on sacrifice. You sacrifice for the company, and you sacrifice for the country too, right? So these are sort of Confucian values: loyalty, harmony, sacrifice for the good of the bigger group. Okay, sacrificing self for the good of the group. That group being company, and the largest unit of this group is the country, right? So you sacrifice yourself for the company and also the country, right? Okay. And Vincent Brandt argue that we have a really unique situation where this group-oriented goal of working or sacrificing oneself for the good of the company and country was a factor, but at the same time, Koreans' sort of a desire for individual success went hand in hand. Is that making sense? So, it wasn't that Koreans simply worked hard for the company and for the country. Okay? The argument goes. Koreans also worked hard because when it comes to success and making money, Koreans could be very also selfish, very self-centered, and in a way materialistic. So they went hand in hand. You work hard for the company and your country, but at the same time, you work hard so that you succeed. Okay? Materialistically. Okay? You earn a lot of money and you succeed, right? The third sort of a factor of culture and timing, and you could also put this under, this doesn't really belong to, I guess this is international factor, right? Timing. Economic opportunity in Vietnam in the 1960s, the construction boom in the Middle East 1970s. We all, benefited greatly from these experiences. And during the height of the Cold War, okay, the international market was open for Korean products, and not necessarily international. It's more specifically the U.S. market. Okay, was, as I said before, Korea enjoyed full access to the US market while keeping or maintaining a protectionist policy within Korea. And in the 1990s, the end of the Cold War meant economic opportunities in China, the former Soviet Union, and Eastern Europe. And I think this is everything that I have for you. Do you have any questions about the economic development of Korea? So you have a good picture of international factors and internal factors that account for the economic success of Korea. It's one of the sort of biggest success stories of capitalism. Okay? So for the remaining time we have, so I guess today is really a crucial time because this is your final official meeting before the submission of the final draft for your PPT, right? So you're required to stay in class until 10:15. So have your group meeting from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.